Pettitt here, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 24, the Federal Reserve. There's a possibility, there's a possibility that you may possibly have thought about this related to Hamilton. And we're not talking about the Department of Treasury, that's different. But we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. And I'm going to be really honest, I actually had no idea what the Federal Reserve did, which is not uncommon because a lot of these departments, I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So that is why we're taking one chapter at a time. One of my friends has stupidly volunteered to have an extroverted conversation with me. KP, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
First question, because my friends are often coming in hot. Is there anything that you need to get off your chest, or can we just start with what is the Federal Reserve?
Yes, let's get off the chest how silly I felt when I took this chapter thinking Federal Reserve, I think I know what that is. And it is not Fort Knox. So,
No.
right? I mean, it is not the gold standard. The Federal Reserve was set up after a crisis back in the early 1900s. It was a place to protect our money, the value
Right.
of our money, right? And I laugh about this now because I am a screaming liberal in many ways, but I'm a pretty fiscal conservative. So I'm reading through this chapter going, this guy seems okay. I recognize that there's some good points here. We want to make sure that we are protecting our government's money. Right now, the Federal Reserve is a place where we house trillions of dollars of debt, which to me is not protecting our money. I don't, like if you were going to draw buckets and say like we have a bucket here and we have a bucket here and we have a bucket here, like we have a bucket that's empty, but it's supposed to be the bucket that's protecting us.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I would imagine you're talking about literally the gold standard, is that all the gold was recalled, and then we still call it the gold standard, but there is actually not gold sitting in a bank somewhere to off balance the amount of coins and pieces of paper that are floating around.
There's not, but also, right, yeah, because otherwise we wouldn't have trillions of dollars of debt.
Right.
But we also wouldn't spend trillions of dollars if we had only like $80 worth of gold in our pocket. So
we might spend 200.
Well, we do live what I guess what I realize coming out of this study, I mean, brief overview, is that I live in a space where credit is okay, right? It's okay to buy things when you don't have money for them. And we live in a society that encourages that.
Right.
And that's not what this guy wants to do. Right. So the guy who wrote the chapter, Paul Winfrey, has had collaborated with many other people. And he states at the bottom of the chapter that no one person should be attributed to any of these thoughts because they did this together. But I was like, but your name's on the chapter. So we're gonna talk about you.
What's interesting, just a little side note, because I'm the only idiot in this whole video series who has actually read the entire thing.
All of them?
Which I do not recommend because my brain was stroganoff. But the only chapter that does not have that same kind of claim at the bottom is that, no other opinions. This isn't representative of anybody else. I'm the one who's willing to put my name on the chapter. Here are the 74 people who helped me write the chapter. Is Ben Carson at HUD.
Oh my gosh.
That chapter is the only one that doesn't have that disclaimer.
How funny.
Like, he's a brain surgeon that was put in charge of housing and urban development.
Right.
That was a chapter. Okay, so focus.
Okay,
let's
focus.
4 main points of the Federal Reserve Chapter 24. Number 1, Federal Reserve is outdated. P.S. I'm interrupting. Thank you. Stop the coup 2025 for these amazing summaries.
Yes, exactly.
Federal Reserve is outdated and needs significant reform or elimination.
According to some.
Right. Number 2, overly influenced by political pressures.
Obviously.
Which the hypocrisy there is that this document is also trying to overly influence through political pressures, but it doesn't like their political pressures. So that's a detail. Number 3, hazards of printing money. The printing of money fuels government spending and debt, which is kind of what we're talking about. We're a culture of credit. This is like a fundamental piece of capitalism that
Yep.
we need to constantly have discontent and want something instead of recognizing that we have stuff other people don't have. And then
Yes.
last but not least, the return to the gold standard as a way to control government spending,
Yeah.
which would take away a lot of the actual tangible money
Yeah.
and minimal equivalent of equity or wealth building that the vast majority of Americans would have.
Agreed.
Yep, that's it.
Those,
Okay.
and
Thank
we're
you,
done.
everyone.
And
Thanks
we're
for
done.
coming. Bye. Yeah, okay.
It's so funny.
Melissa.
It's so funny though, because when you think about the printing of money, and like you said, this person is writing because he's upset with a certain side of the government spending money.
Mhm.
Like we don't want to. He also is the author of an executive order that he wrote, was about reducing poverty
Mhm.
and by promoting opportunity and economic mobility, which is great if you are able-bodied, able-minded, able everything to proceed with his idea of getting a job and being self-sufficient.
Right.
If you're not, there's a reason that the government steps in and helps people. It's because we're not hideous humans, but
Well, technically speaking,
some,
you
some,
are
but
you're digging up a big assumption because when a different chapter when we're talking about Medicare, Medi-Cal, things like that, is that there is no longer room for an able-aged, notice I said able-aged, working-aged
yeah,
human being is always able to do something for work. It is so labor-centered that there's no accommodation for disability or inability to work. Nor does the government have a responsibility to help anybody who's being lazy and living off the dole. Like that is a given premise through the book. So the
interesting.
similar in response to the too big to fail, which is a whole nother thing that I would
Right.
love to talk to these people about.
Yeah.
Um, Personally, I think I'm actually pretty economically liberal. Like I own
Hmm.
my own business and I'm like, tax away. You're helping people. Go for it.
Yeah. Right.
My accountants are always trying to like save me money. And I'm like, it's my moral duty to pay taxes. I get it. I'm a weirdo.
Yeah.
Too big to fail. What is weird to me about that is that it sounds dangerously close to a monopoly, which is bad, but it's their view isn't because it's potentially a monopoly, because monopolies are probably great for the free market. Their view is that if too big to fail were allowed to fail, it would have broken down into multiple private sector opportunities. And the private sector opportunities were cheated because these people were rescued. So they were cheated out of the free market economy.
See what you're saying.
I barely
Yeah.
see what I'm saying, but yes.
Well, it's really interesting that the free banking, the idea that, there's always something, there's a bank and that's all, right? I mean, there's no backed mortgages, there's no anything. I have my notes. Hang on, I gotta pull that up. Did
Mhm.
you also look up the fiat dollar?
I did not look up the fiat dollar.
I
I
was
did.
like, I was laughing. I mean, honestly, right? We talked about this, but like all of the things in here are things that maybe are new to most people.
Yeah.
And unless they
I
have a business degree or a degree in economics, we didn't get training on this.
Yeah. Well, embarrassingly, I do have a business degree and I still didn't know some of this stuff. I did look up the Taylor rule. Do you want to talk about the fiat dollar really quick and I'll talk about the Taylor rule?
No, you talk, well, I haven't. You go ahead with the Taylor rule first. Whoops,
Okay.
where did my picture just
Uh,
left? Where
The
did it go?
Taylor rule is a monetary policy framework that helps central banks set interest rates in response to inflation and economic activity. It is a formula that suggests how central banks should adjust interest rates in response to inflation and the economic activity. I already read that. It considers the federal funds rate, the price level, and the changes in real income. And the idea is that you raise interest rates when inflation increases or output growth is too high. So you increase the rates then. You
Yep.
lower the interest rates when inflation falls short of targets or output growth is below its potential. So the benefits of doing this interest rate game, right? Spoiler alert, is that rich people can make more money. But
Right.
Here's the bulleted list. The Taylor rule can help analyze historical policy, evaluate alternative strategies for interest rate decisions, avoid inefficiency associated with discretionary policy formulation, communicate and explain policy actions more effectively, enhance central bank accountability, improve the credibility of future policy actions, and facilitate forecasting by financial market participants, businesses, and households. So, what this means is, according to the claims that do not have a ton of citations,
No,
mortgages, for those of us that are lucky enough to have a mortgage, which I'd like to point out is not everyone, let
not at
alone
all.
multiple mortgages,
Right.
mortgage should be 43.3% of your income, and rent should be 30% of your income.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, do we tell our employers that? Like, we all need a raise because they're not supporting an increase in minimum wage. They're not supporting salaries meeting that demand based on housing prices. They're not
They're
having
not.
any of that conversation at all.
No.
They're just saying it's your fault for being underemployed.
Right. Underemployed or excessive spending, depending on how they look at that.
Well, they like credit though. Yeah,
They,
wait, still.
yeah, they like credit for certain things, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Specifically, mortgage-backed securities,
correct.
which are all owned by three companies that might possibly be too big to fail. It's
Right. Freddie Mac.
Freddie Mac, and Jenny Mac. I'd
Yeah,
never heard of Jenny Mac
I didn't either. I thought Jenny Mac was actually macaroni and cheese.
or generic. I actually thought the same thing. Yeah.
But what's so interesting, like I know that the when this was written, this is like 2 years old, the data in what we
mhm.
read, but those mortgage-backed securities, $2.6 trillion, right, in the Federal Reserve are just mortgage-backed securities. So we'll assume
2.6 trillion with a
trillion
T, people.
T. So we'll assume as a government in the Federal Reserve, we'll be okay with that many people because they have houses and we can foreclose on them at any time, right?
Right.
Like
It's because of
we
the
can get the
equity of the
money
wealth.
back. Now, again, we also live in California, and so you and I have, maybe a different experience with the cost of housing in the state of California versus
Well,
somebody,
you certainly, because you're
because
like
I'm in the
actually
Bay
in a
Area.
city,
Yeah.
Bay Area. I'm 7 hours north in rural California.
Yeah.
We pay the same taxes, but the property values are very different. Yeah.
We pay the same federal taxes, not the same county taxes.
True, but same state taxes.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Like, I always use gasoline as an example, in that
Yeah.
between all the major cities in California that are constantly encouraged, I'm assuming, to carpool,
Yeah.
there's huge gas taxes to encourage carpooling. I live in a town of 7 people. I can't carpool when there's not that many cars,
Mm-hmm.
that many people going to the same place. And I pay $7, $6 a gallon, just like everybody else does.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
For
Um,
people out of state listening, it's really closer to 5, but yeah. Is it
no,
is
no,
it
it's
$7 a gallon up there?
yeah, at Costco. That's the cheap gas.
Okay, so you are really paying extra tax
Yeah.
for being out in the boondocks.
Right. I mean, they also have to probably fill it up by ship, right? So
Yeah,
like I'm probably paying that tax too.
gotcha. Okay. Sorry,
But
let me
even
go back. Oh, go ahead.
I had friends who just visited at the beginning of the year from Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and they rented a car and we're going to drive around the area and look at the redwoods and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, just so you know, gas is really expensive. And they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then I picked them up and I drove them around one day because I know how much gas costs.
Yeah, that was
Um,
nice of you.
yeah.
So we want to go back to the fiat money, the
Oh yeah,
fiat
yeah. Go
dollar.
for that, and then I got
So
more notey things.
So just fiat money. I don't know where the name came from. I'm just saying it's money that's not backed by a precious metal like the gold, like gold or silver, right? But it's typically designated by the issuing government to be legal tender, and it's authorized by government regulation. So essentially, anything we print, any coins, any dollars that we print as a government, that's fiat money. It's all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Did
great.
not know. I am so comforted that you also did not know this stuff. But like
Nah.
reading this chapter, it's a pretty short chapter, but like every sentence I was like, don't know what that means.
Every
Don't
sentence
know
you
what
have to
that means.
look up and find out what's that? What's that?
What's
Yeah.
that? What's that? Yeah.
And
Okay.
and
So
what's interesting is the fiat money, by the way, became the norm after Nixon is the one who decided to abandon the gold standard.
right,
So
because who needs an actual checks and balance
yeah,
for the actual value of money?
that's it.
Ding.
Okay.
Okay, so fundamentally, I would say people out there paying attention who don't often even budget themselves and they're living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. There's a difference between money that you actually have, credit that you have access to, and then I'm going to go an extra level to the equity that you might
Yeah,
be earning or potentially investing to earn that is towards your wealth development.
absolutely.
And the best example I can think of this is someone that may or may not sound like my husband, is chronically afraid of becoming homeless.
Yep.
Like, so pays extra on the mortgage towards the principal, et cetera, et cetera. Like, this is a reality. Now, we have all survived the lives that we had, and there is a very good reason why this is a reality to him. There's also a very good reason why I would never imagine that I would not have a roof over my head. But when I'm like traveling or camping or going on a road trip, the first thing I do is make sure I know where I'm sleeping, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a priority. Roofs are a priority that we've prioritized. When we have to have a conversation about the principal that we pay above the principal that we pay that accounts for above the interest we paid on that principal. That to me is kind of money related to wealth or equity in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Not an economics major here, people. I was a ceramics major. But
You
the
made the bowl for your own money. You put your money in a bowl.
uh sure did, sure did. What's
Good.
funny is the very first thing I ever pulled is right here and it's full of my change. So literally,
Perfect.
yes. Okay, so if that is how mortgage, wealth, equity works, and you're making an actual money payment that includes the interest on that principal per month in your mortgage term, good to know.
Yeah.
The next piece of that, which I'm going to lump under credit, is that I could get a loan off the equity of my house that
Yes.
is invisible play money.
Yes.
And if I default on invisible play money, they get my house, which
Yes.
is also not paid for.
Right.
But the value of this house, that's what they would foreclose on. Now, the comforting factor of like we are likely to not become homeless anytime soon is that we know people, right? And
Right.
if things are happening that really negatively impact us financially, or where our house is in a fire or something like that and we lose our home, we have a network of opportunities of a place to physically stay for at least a little while. Family members, friends, things like that. We have access to credit. Like, those pieces actually impact our financial security. Where the Federal Reserve comes in is convincing me that I am financially secure or I am
Haha.
not financially secure. And by I mean the wealthiest
The
people
whole.
making these investments. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Is that was
And
helpful to me when I like mapped that out.
that's actually it's a good, every person example. And to then take it back to the person who doesn't own a house, if you're renting, you're paying essentially you're paying someone else's mortgage. Now, that person may not be like if you're renting a house, it's probably a human as opposed to a corporation, right? Like if you're renting an apartment in a big tall whatever. Ultimately, it's always going to go back to a person, right?
Mhm.
Because somebody owns those apartments. Like if you own Trump Tower and somebody
Mhm.
is, renting in there.
But that person, if it's a corporation, I feel like I have to say this.
Yes,
We have given human rights to corporations
we
that we haven't
absolutely
even
have.
given we haven't even given them equally to all humans.
Not at all.
So your landlord, if it's a corporation, a human being will never be held responsible
That is
for
correct.
anything that's happening. Now it is also
Which
as
is
evidence.
pretty obvious
Yeah,
based on our current situation.
yeah. As evidenced, corporations could also not be held responsible for
Totally.
anything wrongdoing. Yeah. Okay. Couple other things I want to mention in this chapter, and then we're going to get to what should we be doing, what should we be thinking about. So, environmental and social goals, ESGs. This is a business measurement that most corporations that are involved in ESG opt into being measured about their environmental and social standards within their business practices. And generally speaking, across the board, Project 2025, thumbs down. Not a fan of caring about the environment or any kind of social standards, even though we support private sector and they can do whatever they want to as a business. We don't,
Right.
we meaning Heritage Foundation, feel like those businesses are peer pressuring other businesses who don't want to use those standards. So we're going to eradicate the standards.
Because freedom is the number one goal.
But my freedom,
Yes.
not your freedom,
Not yours.
my freedom. If
Yes.
at some point I feel unfree, that matters. Now, for the record, some people call that oppression. So when
Yes.
people identify being oppressed, that is not the kind of freedom we're talking about.
No.
So I can't
No,
even
it's
say
all
that
about
with a
financial freedom. Right. Yes. As
it is
diversity
private
educators, this comes
sector,
up.
free market, economic
Yep.
freedom of wealthy people to make a higher return on investment,
Yeah.
period. That is
Because
who,
they want more money in the bank.
right, that's who we're talking about. But
Yep.
I do think it's interesting that no ESGs makes a random appearance in the Federal Reserve. It shows up like it's kind of like glitter. It and the Coast Guard.
Just sticks.
Yeah, it just shows up and we'll be like, I don't know, give it to the Coast Guard. I don't know, get rid of ESGs. Fascinating. The pressure to print money and subsidize or boost the economy
Yeah.
is a balance that I think we should spend some time on. And I appreciate how you introduced it, right? Is that just printing it doesn't mean it has a value, except there is some kind of social value, not a financial or economic value, because we no longer actually have the gold standard.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, and that's the same reason, for instance, the people who are dealing in this invisible, like Dogecoin or whatever. I mean, Bitcoin is not tangible, right? I mean, it's just out there. You're trusting. This is an exercise of trust, all of it, right? Like we're going to print money. We're going to trust that it's worth something. If all of a sudden all of our retailers decided we're not taking that paper stuff anymore, we want a gold coin, then we all have to go figure out how else to do it, right? I don't see that happening, but I mean, if it happens, now what? We're probably more likely to barter and trade, and you might turn over a ceramic bowl and say, look, I'd really like this filled with, beans. Like I need some food, because you can't eat gold. We know this.
Right.
Or Dogecoin or whatever. But
I was surprised. It's funny you mentioned Bitcoin. I was surprised cryptocurrency and Bitcoin didn't show up in the Federal Reserve. And it not showing up, something, I don't know that this is good, but something showed up in my brain that was like, oh, that's not real. Like it's not going to be a thing, right? But I also thought that about compact discs when cassettes were kind of on their way out. Like no one's going to carry this thing around. It's going to break too easily.
Right.
I was correct. Now we don't carry anything around, except now we're going back to records. But I was surprised that these, I'm going to call it like social currency. There's something embedded in our culture, right? Is that
Yes.
when I think of
I give you this
an easy pass. What you just talked about is I give you a bowl, you give me a bowl of beans. That's like a tangible barter. We can see it, we can touch it.
Yeah.
But if we've eradicated the need to see it and touch it, the easy pass is how, at least in San Francisco, coming from up here, we get through the bridges and tunnels, right? Or whatever. So I have a little plastic thing on my dashboard. But if I do not have, I'm never in the Bay Area. But when before I broke down and went to this stupid website to go find this thing to put this plastic thing on my dashboard, I would go through it and it would take a picture of my license plate. There's no place to pay, even if I had.
Nope.
And then cash. I get a bill. Based on my plates with interest because I didn't pay the toll.
I did not know it had interest.
Yeah. I didn't even know I never been here before, right? Like how is someone supposed to do this? But that's how they make money.
Wow.
Right? So you're at an advantage of having a toll pass that you pay with a credit card
that they have on file, and then
they re-up it
every time card. every
Your
time you
credit
spend.
card also has an interest rate.
Yep.
So this brings us to what should we be doing as regular people?
Spending less.
I know. First thing I would say is like open a savings account.
Yes. I really,
Um,
yes.
that
I
that
mean,
is not language. Hopefully my husband didn't hear me say that. But girl, I think we're in trouble.
I do too. I mean, from a big picture perspective, if we as a government, I mean, these are the people we've elected, or some of us not elected, into office, are making choices with money that is not theirs, and they say, oh, they're not taking it seriously. It's like anybody playing Monopoly, right? Sure, I'll fork over that money for, that Park Place Hotel, whatever. I mean, it's not my money. It's not
Right.
real. And so
Right.
if they're
Well,
spending money that they don't feel like is real, if they had to put down, if they were to create, say, an executive order that they had to pay for out of pocket, I'm not saying that we're ever going to see that. I'm just saying people would take it more seriously, wouldn't they?
right.
I
Right. But
mean,
it's someone else's, or
it's
it's this fictitious
yeah,
forecasted risk
yeah,
that exists within potential earnings.
yeah. I
And most of the people who live in this country are trying to physically live with their real money,
yes,
paycheck to paycheck.
yes.
Um,
I can tell a little anecdote. This is old
yeah,
school. So if we go
go for
back,
it.
oh wow, my lights went out. Sorry. That's so old school. I have no electricity. Um, my grandparents who were
That's
raised in the
funny timing.
raised in the Depression, they saved their money in envelopes. And this is an
Mhm.
old school method where people, like, you get a paycheck, you have all the money, I mean, at that point they didn't trust banks. They would save money, they would put like 10% in an envelope, and that's their savings. They would put a different envelope for every bill they might have had for gas, for whatever. And that's how they manage their money. It's literally like what we call digital files on a computer now. They had a file for their dollars.
Mhm.
Um, and what's great about that, I guess, is that they forced themselves to do it, but that is discipline.
Yeah.
And if I were to go back, if I were having this conversation with my grandfather, he'd be thrilled that I'm even bringing this up. Yay, discipline. You heard my story. I am not a disciplined person in general, but I do think that we need to have more discipline with our money.
Yeah.
And that's both on an individual level, a community level, and a large country level.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so here's my ideas, and
Yeah.
I could be crazy, but here's my ideas, because this is the closest of any of the chapters. This is the closest one that was about me and my money and what I
Yes.
need to be doing versus like my ideas and what do I mean by truth and things like
Yeah.
that. So first off, every year I call all of my credit cards and I ask them to lower my annual percentage rate.
Ooh,
Almost
nice.
every year they do not, but
Right.
every once in a while they do.
Huh.
Okay, so that's one.
Yeah.
Number two, you can run a free credit report on yourself and see what your credit report has on you. And if there are weird things on it, you can actually follow up. If there's really weird things on it, you can actually post a note into your credit report that stays for 7 years to explain, like,
Why?
why your house was foreclosed on, or like why you
Yep.
have so much medical debt, or this debt is medical debt, or something.
Yeah.
You can explain some things. You can also consolidate things. You can pay things off and have them removed. You
Yep.
can also correct things. It's
Yep.
free. There's 3 different credit report companies, but you can do that.
Yep.
The other thing I do think, and KP, I really appreciate you bringing this up, is that I think you also, whoever is in your house that is
Mhm.
spending or making money or both, you
Yes.
need to have a conversation about what does it mean to be conservative and what does it mean to be liberal.
Yes.
When, if we were to use, hypothetically speaking, this house as an
Yes.
example, I think that sometimes the way I talk is perceived that I'm going to buy a yacht or something super fancy. And to me, wealth is, if my friend is sick and
Hmm.
calls and says, I'm not feeling very good, can you just bring a pizza over,
Yeah.
that I don't have to balance my checkbook first?
Right.
To me, that's wealth. I can just go
Right.
buy a pizza. A pizza is not a yacht.
But pizzas are like $40 now. Pizzas are
Pizzas
really
are,
expensive.
yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
'Cause
things
you're
have
like,
gone
wait,
up.
I can't get three toppings anymore. Okay, good to
No.
know. But really paying attention to what you're spending on, what are your budgets, what are you saving? I recognize if I keep going down this, I'm going to get struck by lightning because I am not good at this stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think that things are going to be financially tight
Yeah.
for the vast majority of people that are here. And
Yes.
so, for those of us that do not feel any kind of financial constraints, I think we need to create like a slush fund. And you need to figure out how many GoFundMe's you're going to help a month. How
Yeah.
many people, how many meal wagons are you going to help with? If you're going to hold someone sanctuary, how much are you going to pay for them? Are you,
Mhm.
how are you going to be able to use the resources that you have that are in alignment with the agreement that you have around this kind of never ending use of credit
Yeah.
and what it means to be financially supportive of that idea. That would be my parting homework assignment for most. What would yours be?
I mean, similar. What I would say is know what you spend your money on. And I have had a recent conversation about this with a financial advisor, and he is basically trying to whip me into shape in terms of not physically, of course, but we are definitely trying to use tools, digital tools, to track
Mhm,
spending. And I'm a notorious credit card user because I like to get the points. So I'm like,
mhm,
let me use my Southwest card for everything because I want mileage so I could go on an airplane trip for free. It's never free if you don't pay it off, which we tend to do. But I'm just saying those
mhm,
kinds of things are you want to know like what happened this month? Like, do you know like all of your family members who are you're buying a card for or a gift for or something that you choose, they all have their birthday in October. You better have a little extra money in October
mhm,
if you're going to do that. Whereas, I mean, not as altruistic, right, as doing all the GoFundMe's, but those people maybe are part of your fund. Um, I think it needs to be front and center. What happens is with digital money to me, credit, you don't see it. That's
mhm,
why you need the digital tools. You need to watch it accrue. You need to see the pie chart. I'm a visual learner.
mhm,
That's just me.
mhm,
But I have to see where it's going. And I don't see it. You can set reminders with if you go over $50 or go over $100 or whatever it is.
mhm.
Something basic so that you're not I know lots of people who complain about not having enough money, but still go out and get coffees that cost, $6 each. So
$6 a piece.
it's still it's not to say you can't live your life, but you just have to be careful about where you spend it. I mean,
Right.
that's
Whether it's austerity or being frugal or just
yeah.
knowledgeable,
I
you're
think that
doing your financial responsibility piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
I really
I,
also go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the tricks that I did do that my therapist would say altered my money story
Yes.
is that I changed what the bottom of my checking and savings account is. So for a very long time, I would function that zero was the
Mm.
bottom. So then I kept getting
Ah.
like withdrawal, like I don't, oh my gosh, it hasn't happened in so long. I forgot what it's called. What's it called? Oh, you bounce a check.
Oh
Like if
yeah.
you spent too much money, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that I'm super fancy, but that was like a problem because I wasn't doing math in the moment in my head. So
Yeah.
I made my zero this much money.
Right.
So then I have a little bit of padding. So now if it is below this much money, I feel like I have withdrawn
Right.
and I got to put it back in. I don't have to pay the fees, but I have to put it back in to get back to my zero. And that very much helped me and ultimately shifted me feeling like I was broke. I'm not broke
That's right.
because if you look at the bottom number, like I'm doing okay, but I can feel broke. So no, you don't get to buy that fun dress. Mm-mm.
Yes. I mean, it reminds me of gas because I was always taught not to let the gas tank go to empty. So
Mhm.
same, you get to a quarter tank, you fill it up, right? You're not
Right,
gonna, I think
right.
it's a great strategy. Um, I do think that we don't get taught about money at a young age, um, for anybody. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't think, I mean, it's not in school, right? I mean, nobody's teaching a mandatory class. Maybe there are some classes. We teach it, talk about it in a ethereal way. Like, oh, we've got all this big money kind of conversations about economics, but nobody's teaching you how to do your actual money. Nobody's using a checkbook anymore. Like, even if you had a home ec class in the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe you got to learn how to write a check, but nobody's doing that anymore. There are hardly
Right.
any checks being written.
Yeah, there's another thing I learned in my MBA program that is called the amortization chart.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar
And
with that actually.
you can Google this and get a free template and type in how much you owe in a credit card, what's the current interest rate,
Yep,
and it will fill in, and then it will tell you what you should pay each month to either beat the interest rate
yep,
or to pay it off within a certain amount of time. It'll tell you how to do that because it'll accumulate all the interest for you.
yeah.
All right.
I
So,
have
right, go ahead.
the other really great suggestion I have is if you really are a shopper and you feel like you're a little bit of a shopaholic and you don't have a place to go to the Goodwill. I mean, go to the secondhand store near you, go to the garage sales because there's so many great finds there. And I know
Consignment shop.
it's
When I
yeah,
when people take pictures of me, this is probably very capitalistic of me, but I don't feel like I can wear the outfit again
yeah,
because I don't want to look like my headshot, which is weird. I obviously have more clothes and I like the thing my picture's taken in, but whatever, it's who I am. So I give my clothes to the local consignment shop, and I'm one of the few plus size women in my town who donate like stage level clothing.
right.
So they love it because it's like formal wear for regular people, right? It's my
Yeah.
work wear, but I'm on stage.
Yep.
Um, that's a great idea. Okay, so there's a lot of things to think about in this chapter, even though it's a very short chapter.
Tons.
Be
Tons.
responsible is the key. Also, I would like to fact check myself. Hamilton did not create the Federal Reserve.
No.
I thought that's what he was talking about in the play, but it's
That's
not what he's
funny.
talking about. He did, however, lay the foundation because what he was shooting for was called the First Bank of the United States. It was established in 1791. And the idea was to share the funding and share the reserves within the
Mm.
states to support different states through different hardships as they were developing.
It's kind of
That
like
is,
FEMA.
yeah, kind of.
Sounds like FEMA.
So anyway, I just wanted to point that out so that people weren't
Okay.
like, Jessica, that's not what Hamilton did. I know, but that's what
Oh,
I thought he
that's
did.
that's so funny.
I'm stupid. All
No,
right.
we're not stupid. We are not exposed to these things.
Well, and that's kind of the whole point about Project 2025, right? Is
It
that we
really
need to be
is.
exposed to what this agenda is because
So that
there,
we don't fall victim to whatever they're doing.
right. We need to
Without
be
without
able
a
to.
voice, we need to know what's happening so we have the voice. I did me.
Democracy is
Yeah.
based on our ability to voice ourselves, and based on the
Participation.
Supreme Court,
Yeah.
money is a form of voice. And so we need to know where our money's going, what we are investing in, if we're investing, what they do or don't stand for, the places that you are investing in, what you're saving for. That's
Yeah.
the only thing we can do is to be a conscious consumer. So,
Yeah.
KP, thank you very much.
So
I really
much.
appreciate this. This was
Thanks.
great.
Thanks for the
Um,
opportunity, Jess. It's been really fun to stretch my knowledge beyond that of higher education.
well, feel free to listen or watch to any of the videos because all these conversations have been really interesting and fascinating to me
Yeah.
because it's comforting to know that a lot of us don't know,
Oh,
but
agree.
it is also
It's
usurping
also
the heritage.
disconcerting.
But well, no, I think it's usurping the Heritage Foundation's power is that we don't know this stuff.
Right.
So we need to know this stuff because then we can pay attention. So,
Absolutely.
all right. Thank you very
Perfect.
much.
Thank you so much.